Call it Tales. Cultivate the inquiring mind. Don't suppress a question, however trivial, that sparks your curiosity. Track it down or look it up as soon as you can. Enjoy what you are doing, what you are seeing, as fully as you can find anything in it to enjoy. Savor the moment, the scene, the sound, the word. Carpe diem, orum minutum. Hello, and welcome to Storytime with Isto. You've reached chapter 18 of Tarot Tales, a weekly gathering where I tell a little-known fairy tale based on a randomly drawn tarot card from the week prior. Those of you that were with me last week know that I drew the Hermit, which is this absolutely gorgeous card, one of my favorites in the deck. I always feel very drawn to it, and after reading more about it this week, I understand why. Now, there are a couple of things worth pointing out in terms of like symbolism on this card. First and foremost, we have that staff, which if you remember, I believe it was the Page of Wands, looked as though they were measuring themselves up against that staff, seeing how high they were in comparison with everything else. And that has that same kind of like self-judgment, self-reflective quality that we're looking at here. Then we also have a star, which is trapped in the lantern of the Hermit right here, which we'll talk about right at the very end. Now, I've got my little altar set up here for the actual card. Let's make sure you've got a nice angle. There we go. And we are going to do things a little bit differently this week. You know, trying to play around a bit with the format because this is my show and why not? So before I dive into it, I just want to say thank you for joining me. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoy it. And we'll dive into it. Oh, but first I should talk about the cocktails. So the cocktails are emulating the Platypus, which I've got here on the top of my beverage book. For those of you that drink alcohol, we have the Recluse. And for those of you that don't drink alcohol, we have the Transformation, which is kind of like a hot toddy, but for a mocktail, and that's what I've got here. So for joining me this week, I say a hearty thank you. Oh my God, that's delicious. I used hibiscus. Incredible. Alrighty, so we've lit the Hermit, which I should have mentioned, as you may have guessed, is this feeling of isolating yourself from the rest of the world, going out and spending time in reflection, getting to know oneself, measuring yourself up against the staff, looking towards creativity in any kind of direction. And upside down, it's actually meaning that we're still retreating, but it's less for like personal growth, and it's more because we've become isolated or feel isolated from things like friends, family, and we're feeling cast away. So it's got that kind of negative quality attached to it. Alrighty. So I've got a super fun story for you all from Australia that comes from this book called Aboriginal Stories, which I have linked to in the description below. And there's so many really interesting, compelling stories in this book. There's also a little dictionary that has kind of English to various different Aboriginal groups language and back there out, which I used quite a bit. So I would actually really recommend taking a look at this because I found it really helpful and I found the stories really charming. That said, there were so many things that I could have used as vocab words that I have decided to just give you all of them up front in my little platypus dictionary. And so I'm going to run through my fun facts as they will appear in the story. And then I will just read through the story naturally without any kind of interruption. And that's how this evening's going to go. All right. So, first and foremost, some of you maybe like me, and didn't really know what the word Aboriginal meant. So I've got notes on the back of here. Forgive me if I'm looking down. But so Aboriginal Australian is indicative of kind of like the Indigenous people in the Australian area and outlying islands. It comes from the Latin aborigine, which is from the very beginning. And I believe some version of that is actually used as a derisive word. So Aboriginal and then like some variation of that Latin phrase is not something that you're supposed to say, which hopefully I didn't just say, but I'm not entirely sure. The word Aboriginal, unsurprisingly, was given by English settlers in the 1830s, and they started referring to themselves as Australians and everyone else there as Aboriginal from the very beginning. Over 50,000 years worth of development of various different groups within the Aboriginal kind of like larger umbrella. And it's only been in the last 250 years or so that that group of people have started to be identified together and coming together to identify, to form strength in numbers and advocate for various different rights. Much like the Native Americans, there is this concept of the stolen generation, which is that through various different governmental policies, children of Aboriginal Australians were adopted or forcibly removed from their home between the years of 1910 and 1970. Some estimates indicate 1 out of every 10 Aboriginal Australians or 1 out of every 3 Aboriginal Australians. The only other fun fact about Aboriginal is that scientists believe that they derive from Southeast Asia around 11,700 years ago. And they have yet to prove it, but they feel pretty strongly in that theory. And if they proved that that was true, that would indicate that the Aboriginal Australians were some of the earliest humans to conduct long form sea voyages. All right, Aboriginal. Biame, which you will hear, is the Aboriginal creator god in the Aboriginal kind of belief system or mythology. Yi is a goddess of light and creation, a solar deity, so represented by the sun. As we get into the story, you're going to hear about this light crossing over the heavens and then coming down to earth. And Yi actually predated Biame. Cool. We're going to talk about the Nullarbor Plain, which is this really flat, arid part of southern Australia, which is where Yi is going to descend onto the earth. It was originally called Undiri, which means the waterless area. Corroboree is a generic word for a meeting meant to represent the kind of like Aboriginal Australian collective. And there could be like just a general conversation, meetings, some kind of rites or initiations or ceremonies. And that meaning could go through a variety of different hats as we read through the story. All right. That's some of the harder stuff. Now on to some of the funner things. Kookaburra, which I don't know if you knew about this. Kookaburra sits in the old gum tree. Is actually a short-tailed, large-headed, compact bird that is very, very cute. And the reason that they say "Merry, Merry King of the Bushes he" is because its laugh is very distinctive and has kind of like a laughter quality to it, which is absolutely delightful. Sadly, they are terrestrials, so they don't fly very much. And when they do, they're not very fast, and they are specifically noted as not being as fast as cars, because I guess cars kill a lot of them. I did not know that the word fledgling or fledging is a stage in a bird's life. A fledgling is a child bird that has not yet left the nest. So fledgling is a bird between hatching from an egg and being able to take flight. We're going to use the word totem today. You see why we had to do this dictionary up front, Matt? We'll review it in post if it was a good idea. A totem is a spiritual being or sacred object, a symbol that serves as an emblem of a group of people. Specifically in Aboriginal Australian culture, this idea of a connection to a mutualistic relationship with nature. So you're going to see a relationship where a totem is like different animals, where a totem is like torrential weather. And I'm not entirely clear of the connection here, but it's going to be used to some magic purposes here. A cormorant was a word I learned, which is just a large seabird. The Blue Mountains are a mountainous region near the border of Sydney's metropolitan area in Australia. Thinouine is an ancient legendary name for the platypus. Pinyali is an ancient legendary name for the emu. And bandicoots are just cute little marsupials that are omnivores. Okay, stick with me. We are now done with all of those vocabs. You know what a platypus is. So I just want to let you know, as we dive into the actual story, that this was one of the original illustrations of a platypus. And it was said by scientists that the platypus itself could not actually be real. It looked as though it was sewn together, specifically that it was a duck's bill sewn onto a beaver's head. And there's a record of them actually looking for stitches. They thought it was a joke. Other fun platypus facts are that they are one of 5 species of monotremes, which indicates that they're a mammal that lays eggs. The other 4 are echidnas, or anteaters. They were hunted for platypus for its fur throughout the 20th century. They are born with ankle spurs, but the men actually have ankle spurs that are poisonous and have specific poison proteins that are distinctive only in the male platypus. And that poison won't kill a human, but it will kill like a cat or a dog, and it can be so painful that a victim can faint. They are electroreceptic, which means that they can see electric waves. So they detect movement by the electricity that's generated by muscles moving in the body, which I think is absolutely incredible. And they are also bioluminescent. So if platypuses are not already your favorite animal, I hope that they will be by the end of the story. Which is a lot of ado to get us to the actual meat and potatoes of this evening, which is Chapter 18, The Hermit, and Why Platypus Lives Alone. When animals were brought to life from the frozen depths of earth by the sun goddess, who shall tell what they were like? There are some who say that they had the form of men and women, and others that say that they had many different other shapes. We can be certain of only one thing, that after a time they grew tired of the forms that Biame had given them, and were seized by vague longings. Those who lived in the water wanted to be on dry land. Those who walked on the earth wished to feel the freedom of the sky. There was not a single animal that was not possessed by this strange discontent. They grew sad and hid themselves away. The cheerful sounds of their voices were no longer heard, and the green plants wilted in sympathy with their friends. Looking down in her slow crossing of the sky, Yi realized that sorrow lay heavily on earth. For the last time, she descended from the sky and stood on the Nullarbor plain. From every direction, a tide of animal life flowed towards her. "Oh, she has come back! The goddess will listen to our requests!" they shouted. "Come closer," she called to them. "Tell me, what is troubling you?" A babble of voices answered her. Waves of sound surged around her. She held up her hand. "Stop, stop," she called. "I cannot hear what you are saying when you all speak at once. One by one, please." She beckoned to Wombat, who craved a body that could wriggle into shady places where he could hide from others. He was followed by Kangaroo, who wanted strong legs for leaping and a tail with which to balance himself. Bat said he wanted wings so that he could fly through the air like a bird. Poor Platypus could not make up his mind and ended up with the parts of many animals. Geese smiled as they came and made their wants known to her. She smiled because their forms were so bizarre. She smiled tenderly because she realized that with the transfiguration of their bodies, life would change for her little creatures. She knew that the granting of their wishes would not bring contentment to her little ones. The restless surge of life that seeks and demands would take them away from her. Other changers would come, suddenly or slowly, in mysterious ways, and by strange adventures. The world was to be full of change. She dismissed them and watched them disperse to every quarter of the earth before she rose up for the last time into the sky. When the first men became animals, the country was so thickly populated by birds, lizards, snakes, that it became impossible for them to live together in peace. There was not enough food. So the weaker ones died of starvation. Birds preyed on reptiles, reptiles on animals, and animals on birds. Not one of them was safe. To drop off to sleep was to feel the bite of sharp teeth, the spear-like thrust of a beak, or the poison fang of a snake before life ebbed quickly away. At length, remembering the corroboree that they had held when they were still men, they all met together to discuss what should be done. The snakes spoke first. "We are tired of being hunted by birds and animals. Only this morning, several of our people were eaten by the kookaburras. Snakes have as much a right to live as anyone else. We are an inoffensive tribe." "Oh, but you rob our nests," the kookaburras accused them. "And if the eggs escape, you take our fledglings. Our nest should be left alone." There was an outcry from all the other animals. "Do you respect our children? It is when they are young and defenseless that you kill them without the thought of the sorrow you bring." "Enough!" shouted the leader of the snakes. "We all have the right to live, snakes as well as anyone else. We have debated the answer to our tribe, and there is only one solution." "Oh, what is it? What is it?" "You must go away and leave us in peace. The land belongs to us reptiles. There is no place here for birds and animals." A chorus of derisive laughter rose, led by the kookaburra. "If anyone leaves, it will be you reptiles." "No, it will be you. We are humble people. We creep along the ground and try to make ourselves inconspicuous. But we have a weapon that is denied to you. Long years ago, the crow gave us poison fangs. We would not like to keep using them on you." Such a babel of voices now arose that no one could be heard, and the meeting broke up in disorder. Of the reptiles, the frilled lizards were the most vicious. Their leaders called them together to discuss what had happened at the corroboree. "The snakes made threats, but they talk too much. The animals and birds need a real fright. The snakes are only making them fighting mad. We have no poison fangs, but we must remember our totem. There is no need to tell you what to do." The totem of the frilled lizards was the wild elements of nature: thunder and lightning, wind and rain and storm. Leaving the other people of the lizard tribe behind, they swarmed up the nearest mountain until they reached the summit, where they were close to the spirits of the storm. They painted their bodies with a mixture of fat and red ochre, and lined them with bands of white clay. They were a fearsome sight. Then they gashed themselves with stone knives until the blood ran down their bodies and mingled with the paint designs. And they sang the song of storms. So many frilled lizards sang that song that black clouds raced across the sky and pressed heavily on the mountaintop. Lightning flashed, and the gloom and thunder rolled down the long valleys. Then came the rain, driving spears and splinters of silver that slashed in the trees and dug pits into the dry ground. The pits filled with water and overflowed into tunnels that grew to streams, and streams into rivers that spilled into lakes. The lakes rose until the tops of tall trees were lost beneath the surging water. The birds fled from the storm, while the reptiles and animals crouched in caves, shivered under the poor shelter of trees, or climbed the mountainside to escape the advancing water. With a final peal of thunder, the storm rolled away. For many days and nights, the storm spirits had hurled their weapons against the defenseless earth. Blue skies returned, and the sun shone until the land steamed, and the bedraggled animals stretched out to feel the unaccustomed warmth. They searched for their friends among the fallen trees. Everywhere they went, they found the pathetic bodies of platypuses, who were so slow-moving that they had been unable to escape from the flood waters. Before the storm, they had been the most numerous of all the animals. Now, not a single one of them could be found. Several years passed by. The birds returned, and as children were born to the animals, the strengths of the tribes increased. But there were still no platypuses. Even those who had been impatient with them in the past regretted their loss. Others sorrowed and sought everywhere to see if there were any survivors. Hope revived when the far-ranging cormorant came one day with a report that he had seen a platypus track in the mud at some place between the Blue Mountains and the sea. A carpet snake, returning from a visit to distant relatives, also related that as he was watching a pool, he had seen a hole underwater which led to the bank, which he recognized as the entrance to the burrow of a platypus. There was great excitement about this news. Animals of all kinds met together to talk about it. The only absentees were the frilled lizards. Everyone knew that they had been responsible for the flood which had destroyed the poor little platypuses. They had been told that they were not welcome at the gathering. The lizards puffed out their frills in vexation and wore frowny faces, which they have never since managed to get rid of. "What totem do the platypuses belong to?" the kookaburra asked. Everyone seemed to join in the discussion. Because they had ducks' heads and laid eggs, the birds claimed that platypuses were really birds. But the lizards and snakes had an equal claim because they too were egg layers. Kangaroos, possums, wallabies, and many other animals maintained that as platypuses had bodies covered with hair, as well as tails, they undoubtedly belonged to the animal family. No one could resolve these contradictory statements, especially when the fish joined in and pointed out that platypuses spend a good deal of their time underwater. "We need to hear what they have to say for themselves," one of the kookaburra leaders said. "If someone will volunteer to go beyond the mountains, it may be that they will find the platypus family that cormorant and carpet snake have reported." It was generally agreed that this was a good plan. As Carpet Snake knew where the place was, he agreed to make the journey. To everyone's satisfaction, he returned a few days later with an old and venerable platypus, who was at once surrounded by an eager throng of animals, birds, and reptiles, anxious to do all they could to show how glad they were to see him. When the excitement died down, a space was cleared, and the old platypus began to speak. At first, his voice was low and unsteady, because he was not used to company, but gradually it grew stronger. My friends, you have asked me to tell you what people we belong to. Ever since that great flood, we have been isolated. We have felt that no one wanted us. But as you assure me that you are all my friends, we shall be glad to come back. We come from an ancient race, renowned for their wisdom, and we claim kinship with you all. Our first ancestors were reptiles. Later, we belonged to the family of birds. Lastly, we became animals. The platypus was interrupted by a buzz of conversation at this news. Suddenly, a voice rose louder than the rest from the crowd. Where is Theoine? All the animals looked at each other in bewilderment, trying to find who had spoken, until Emu strode to the front. Why is he coming forward? They whispered to each other. Hello, Pinyali, said Platypus. Emu smiled. You have called me by the name that was given to my fathers, but is known to no one in this present generation except myself. Great is your wisdom and knowledge, Platypus. Emu embraced him and said, Tell me, O wise one, what is your totem? The totem of the platypus is the bandicoot. What is your totem? Our totem is the snake. Then, as I have already told you, we are all kin. No, Emu said hastily. We would welcome you into our family of birds. Your young men should marry emu girls. Platypus looked at him sadly. You tell me that the totem of a bird is the snake, and I say that our totem is an animal. It is as I say. The platypus is akin to you all, yet he cannot marry you. We are alone. It has been planned from the beginning of time, and we must accept the decision of Bayame, the Great Spirit. He made his way through the crowd, which parted in front of him, and walked slowly and sadly back to his home. So, Platypus, who is of no tribe, yet of every tribe, lives alone on land and in water, and thanks the ancient gods who made him as he is. The end. I hope you see why I tried to front load that with all of these little fun facts. So much to try and communicate. I really love that story. I love, and I especially love it for the Hermit. I love this idea of the platypus just retreating, thinking that nobody wanted him around, which is very Hermit reversed, and then coming in and dropping some like strong knowledge for everyone when it's like the Hermit upright. So it's like encapsulating both versions of this story. And then also this idea that humans themselves got so bored in like ancient Aboriginal Earth that they wanted to change their shape. And then they went off into these different animal paths. I thought was so cool. And it actually, unlike like Aesop's Fables or any of the other stories that I've seen, gives a really compelling idea as to why these animal stories would have such kind of human characteristics, which I love. I love that little Aboriginal story. All right. And I think the final one is that I really like the fact that Platypus comes down and he's like, hey, you guys want to be friends? And they're like, let's fuck. And the platypus is like, okay, I guess I'm just going to go live alone again. Anyway, my gratitude for this week is a bit of a cop out. Man, this week has been thrown together like a platypus, I tell you what. But I've had a lot of fun with it. Uh, when I think about this hermit idea, I think about when I got the original idea for this show, and it was about a year ago. It was like November, the first week of November, so almost exactly a year ago, when I went to a cabin all by myself and became like very little hermit like, and I got the idea for this show. And ever since then, every 3 months or so, I force myself. It's not really a huge pain, but like I go somewhere and spend the weekend alone and I reflect on where my life is. And so, um, my gratitude is to me this week for holding that space because that's historically been something that's hard for myself. And I'm proud of it. So kudos to me. Oh, goodness. All right. And then as for next week, as I was talking about the star, so I don't know if you've noticed this before, but the card from last week is always in the back shelf right there. So last week we had the Hanged Man, which is this kind of caught in a bind card asking you to please step back and reflect. Now we've got the Hermit, who is the very definition of a reflective card. And the hermit is measuring up against this staff and looking into this lantern, using this lantern to guide his way. And that lantern has a star in it, which is our next card, our card for next week, which is absolutely gorgeous. Now, when I say next week, I don't actually mean next week. I'm going to be back on November 30th. I'm taking a week off for Thanksgiving, but I will hopefully see you then. We're going to be talking about creativity, which is kind of the basis of the star card. And we're going to dive into some muse stories from Greco-Roman mythology. So I'm really excited about that. All right. What a hodgepodge this week has been. Thanks for sticking with me. This has been a fun one. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you treat yourself with love and respect. May you continue to grow and find the strength to persevere through the painful parts of growth. May you find inspiration all around you. And may you find peace. Thank you for joining me this week. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate. Bye, y'all.